we can, we're gonna go ahead and pray, so we're gonna go ahead and pray and we're gonna have the doors open, see how much air we can get tonight, and, with that open over there, we seem to be getting a little bit.
It's not too bad.
So, could be worse. This is like a thing that's happening. Went to the radio station today and their air conditioning was completely gone.
Oh.
They took the main unit off from the roof of the building and they're putting a new unit on this weekend. So they're gonna be without air all weekend. So, now I come here and ours is off. So, all right, let's go ahead and pray and then we'll get started here this evening. So, Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you so much. We thank you for a place to meet, and Lord, the worst we have to contend with is no air conditioning. And we're just thankful that we can meet so many places around the world. They don't have this freedom. And even unfortunately, right here in our own country, so many places don't have this freedom anymore. It's been taken from them. And Lord, we just thank you again. If we have a place to meet, just bless, watch over us tonight. Keep us safe, Lord. Pray that you would bless our time together. Bless the time that we spend in your word this evening. We thank you for the refreshments. Bless them as well. And to help us to be a witness and testimony to those around us, Lord, not only in the hotel, but the surrounding community and online through YouTube and all. Help us to be a blessing to somebody tonight. Help us to point people that are searching toward Christ. And help us to encourage believers in their walk with you. We just thank you and give you the honor and the glory for it. Lord, in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. 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 Well, good to see everybody tonight. And I think the coffee's about ready over there. Tim is trying to see if they got that fan that they use to dry the floors, if they can bring that out, but hasn't found anybody at the front desk to ask him. So hopefully we'll get one of those out. And that will make a big difference if we get some of the air moving a little more forcefully. Because there's air in the hallway, just not in here. And so, couple things I wanted to mention before we get going here tonight. Just a reminder, we just need to keep praying. I've got two things here, and I've been using these on the radio. Awake America, the Ohio chapter, put a letter out to the governor and elected officials. This was out about a month ago, when the mask mandate was only on a county-by-county basis, depending on whether or not you reach the magic color. And let me just mention something here I mentioned on the radio, where he makes a statement here. It says, the issue now is not masks, but overreached by the state of Ohio. And that's the thing. The mask is just a little thing. And we have to be concerned about it, because what's happening is the government is using this issue, and the governor and his office are trying to play good cop in the sense that they're saying, well, we're not mandating it. We're not trying to harass churches with this. But what's been happening is state health departments have been harassing churches, kind of like a good cop, bad cop in a sense, where the state health departments have been doing the harassment. And so that's kind of the reason, too, that we've been talking about when we come in here, because, when we're in here, we're, there we go, got a little noisy back in that corner, so we'll just have to talk louder. Ooh, I can feel that. Kim, if you want to point maybe a little bit more this way, it'll circle through the whole room better. Just point it this way. There we go. Then it'll come through and wow, that's a good breeze coming through. That's a different one than one they used last time. That's nice. So we'll have a little bit of noise there to contend with, but at least it's a little cool air. This packet of papers here is a call log, just Summit County. So, when this first came to light, there were two churches that we were aware of. One was a church in Summit County over in Stowe, I believe, an Apostolic or Nazarene church, I believe, and then Cleveland Baptist in Cuyahoga County. Well, this is a call log of complaints that were made about churches in Summit County alone. This is just Summit County. And it's all kinds of churches. There's Catholic churches, there's Presbyterian churches, there's Apostolic churches, there's Baptist churches. And I was reading some of the complaints, just the generic type of complaints on the radio today. The complaints range from people were sitting too close together. You got to watch these two here, too close together, and not having masks on. And it was terrible. I mean, we have small children present, but they were singing in church. Oh, can you believe the horror? They were singing in church. Terrible. Let's see. Having food. That was another thing. Sharing food. These are the types of complaints that have been going into just the Summit County Health Department. And then the other thing is that the way the complaints were being made kind of breaks down to people driving by and seeing as they drove by, there's a lot of cars in the parking lot. And I saw kids outside without masks. And this, that, and the other. The other is people who actually attended a service or activity at those churches and saying, I saw this or I saw that in the church taking place. And then the other is watching online. We looked online and we saw this or we heard that. So, in a sense, what's going on is that they're allowing the governor, now this is just my opinion, this is not representing any official statement. My opinion is the governor's trying to play good cop. The governor's office is saying, well, we're not trying to harass churches while they're letting the state or the county health departments make threatening phone calls. Because if you're sitting in a church office and you're the secretary and you get a call from the county health department saying, we have a complaint against your church, that's not usually something that makes you feel all comfy inside. Usually it makes the heart race a little bit and say, oh no, what's going on? The government has a complaint against our church. Or it might be one of the pastor or one of the pastor's family members, get this phone call. And in Summit County, they've had, some of the responses. So one of the county or health department officials has kind of been more the heavy-handed guy. The one church in Stowe where we were first finding out some of this stuff, he was threatening them, if you don't do this, you'll get fined, and you'll get this, and you'll get that. So this is what's happening. Now the lieutenant governor had made a statement that they've instructed the county health departments not to harass churches. But it's happening.
The lieutenant governor said that. The governor could have contacted them and said, ignore what he says.
The governor could rescind the face mask mandate. That would make life a lot easier. But Tim and I were talking on the way over, even if he rescinds the face mask mandate statewide, you still have companies that are going to have it. It's like when all this was starting, remember, it was Menards instituted you can't come in without a face mask. So we took our business to another, home improvement store. Now all of them have it. But it's just like I said, when you're dealing with companies have every right to make a decision and enforce it. But the problem is when the government steps in and says, not only do the companies have to do it, but churches have to do it. It puts churches in the position of having to refuse to have a service or refuse to let people in because we've got too many people or you can't come in because you're not dressed appropriately, meaning you don't have a face mask on. And it's amazing. Some of the same people that would get upset if the church said men cannot come in unless you wear a tie are more than willing to say, oh, you can't let people come in unless they have a face cover. So, pray for churches, and the Awake America and Ohio Christian Alliance are trying to gather more information in regards to churches that are being threatened or intimidated, but it's not so much always an actual threat, it's intimidation of churches. And the world is using this to basically to silence churches. I heard a statistic last week that about a third of the churches that closed for the coronavirus shutdown, even though they didn't have to in most cases, sometimes they legitimately had to, but the estimation is about 30% of churches are not going to reopen. I mean, that's a sobering statistic, isn't it? We've always heard and been concerned about churches closing every year, numbers of churches closing. But we're talking about a large number of churches simply not opening again.
Churches being singled out. Casinos are okay.
Well, that's because the virus is smart. The virus knows if you're gambling, it can't get in. The virus knows if you're throwing a brick through a window, it can't get in. The virus knows that if you're drinking alcohol before 10 p.m. at night, it can't get in. But if you go to church or go to Bible study, it's got you in its sights. It's going to get you. If you sing, it's really going to get you. If you go to Walmart, you stand in line, it's not going to get you. But if you go to church, it's going to get you. I mean, it's a smart virus. It's amazing. I've never known a virus that's been as aware of who the targets are like this one. It's just amazing. And so we have to be aware that this is what's happening in the world around us. And so if you hear of any churches that are being threatened by the county health department, tell them that the Ohio Christian Alliance has a form. Awake America doesn't have a thing to contact, but Ohio Christian Alliance had it here somewhere. The form is not on here, but you can go online, ohioca.org, and then I think link to a form where that can be recorded. Last Monday, Kim and I, we went to a thing in Independence, Faith Wins. It's Chad Connolly, who was the first ever Faith Outreach Director for the Republican National Committee 4 years ago during the Trump campaign and all that. He's now running this organization, and if anybody remembers the God Bless America rally that was held down in Canton a year ago in May, did you go down to that? But Byron Fox, who does that, he's an evangelist, and he's been doing these God Bless America rallies. And I know a number of the area churches have gone down there because we went down a couple of nights, and when we got down there, I met some people from different churches that were there. And him and Chad Conley, in the past week, they embarked on this 4-state tour where, how would you like to have this for your schedule? It was a marathon. They had, for instance, on Monday morning, they had a breakfast meeting where they had pastors in, and they talked about the importance of churches voting, Christians voting in churches, encouraging people to vote, and also some local issues discussed by some people that were there. It was either in Virginia or North Carolina. Then at lunchtime, they drove to another location in Virginia, I believe they drove. Then they had another lunch meeting where they did the same thing again. They went from there to the airport. They hopped on an airplane. They came to Cleveland, and they had on Monday night a dinner with area pastors here. They got into the car and they went down to Canton, where they spent the night. They had breakfast at a breakfast meeting at it was Canton Baptist Temple or something. But at any rate, there was a location down there. They had a breakfast meeting in Canton. They went up to the Akron Canton Airport. They flew from there to Cincinnati, where they had a lunch meeting with a bunch of pastors. From there, they went to Dayton, Ohio, where they had a dinner meeting. From there, they flew to, I think it was Atlanta, Georgia. That was Monday and Tuesday. That was just 2 days out of a 4-day schedule. Saying, how in the world did they do this? One of the people that supported, I think it was supportive of the God Bless America rally with Brother Fox, was saying, what can I do to help make this possible? And they were talking, and he was talking about giving them airline points. And he looked at their schedule and what they wanted to do, and he said, you know what? I have a private airplane. You guys use it. So here's Brother Fox. You know, most independent Baptist evangelists don't have a private airplane to fly around on. You know, we kind of leave that to the assemblies and the charismatics. You know, they're the ones that get the private jets to fly around. Yeah. And of course, I think his would have been a little bit bigger than this one was. And certainly, Chad Connolly doesn't have the deep pockets to have a private airplane. But God touched the heart of this guy. Said, "Here, I have a private airplane." So the airplane flew them from Virginia to Cleveland while they were having the meeting with us in up here in Independence. He flew down to Akron, Canton, spent the night in Akron, Canton. When they were done with the breakfast meeting in Canton, they went up to the Akron, Canton airport. The guy flew them down to Cincinnati. That's how they got around. They had a private airplane at their disposal. I mean, that's a blessing that God took care of, and they were able to get through it. We're going to have them on the radio at some point. I haven't got it set up yet, but they'll be on the radio with us at some point talking about this. So let me encourage you, if you don't know if you're registered to vote or not, you'll make sure of that. If you voted in the last presidential election, you most likely are registered to vote. And I think most people here probably did. But if you moved since the last time you voted, it may not, you may check with the local county board of elections. That's the best place to go. You can call them up, they can find out. And the other thing too, if you would like to work at the election polls, the polling stations, they have a urgent need for poll workers on election day. So call your county board of elections, and you don't make a whole lot of money, but you're making a big contribution to not only your community, but also I think it's really good when we can have Christians that are there exercising a little salt and light influence in those polling stations. So,
Did they have vote by mail 2 years ago?
Ohio has absentee ballots, which you have to request an absentee ballot. This is different than the vote by mail you hear them talking about.
Yeah.
The vote by mail you hear them talking about, they just send ballots to everybody, and then you send it in, huh?
To dogs.
Yeah. But in Ohio, you have absentee ballots where if you don't think you can make it or you don't want to, you just, it used to be you about had to have your doctor's note in order to get an absentee ballot, but they're really easy to get today. You just call the Board of Elections and say, I'd like an absentee ballot. Actually, the state has sent an application for an absentee ballot to all registered voters. So if you don't get one of those, that might be a good idea to contact and make sure you're registered. Once you get the absentee ballot, you fill it out with your identification and you send it in. It's more secure and it's more regulated than just mailing out ballots.
Well, he was
Everybody.
he was in Iraq when the fighting was real heavy, so they got one of them too.
Yeah.
So
And I used to do absentee when I was in the Air Force in England. They send you an absentee ballot. So you can ask for an absentee ballot. They'll send it to you. You fill it out. You send it in.
now was that through the military or the
No, the absentee ballot says it runs through the Board of Elections.
and it goes through his APO?
If you're in the military, that's what happens. Yeah. If you're in the military, it goes to APO, or if you're in the Navy, it's an FPO, right? I think Fleet Postal Office. In the Army, it's the Army Postal Office, or Post Office, and the Air Force is the Air Post Office. Air Postal Office. But in the Marines, I think they use the FPO as well, depending on where they're at. Sometimes they use it. But yeah, so I mean, the absentee ballot's easy to get, and it's something that everybody should.
We go down in person and you vote early.
You can do that too.
I've done that a couple of times.
Yeah, you can vote early. So in Ohio, it's very easy to vote.
Yeah, in fact, in Ohio, it's like 30 days ahead.
Yeah, we're one of the earliest. So,
Let's see. Kim, did you share this over to
Who was that?
CBS? They did a drive run and they found out those ballots were messed up. Abandoned buildings had an address and sent it out. And then when
That was basically what I wanted to mention before we got going, so that we can get that mentioned. But essentially, from that point on, or from this point on, whatever anybody's got, it's fair game. We can talk about that, or we do on Friday nights. It could be mostly looking at current events in light of the Bible, or mostly looking at theological things. Sometimes we do one issue for the whole night. Sometimes we do a dozen issues. So it's pretty informal, whatever anybody likes to start with. So, but I just wanted to get those mentioned here tonight, because I knew we got started. We're going to get back to it. Yes, sir. Sorry. Sure. Yeah.
FreeOhioNow.com is a new organization. I don't know a whole lot about them.
What is it again?
FreeOhioNow.com. One of the speakers at the anti-mask rally at the State House a few weeks ago represented an organization. They're having a county by county rally. People pretty much standing on the street corner holding signs and getting flags. There's having one this Saturday on the 22nd. Not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow. I kind of got wrangled into meeting with the county leader, so I don't know where it's going to be for Summit County. If anyone has a suggestion of a high traffic area that would be a good representative of the county, I'd love to hear a suggestion, and I'll have somebody there. So I'm not standing there waving a flag on myself.
Yeah.
They'll be doing some more rallies in the future, similar things like driving through neighborhoods with flags and stuff like that. But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I remember that emblem because I actually copied that emblem, that triangular emblem, the eagle emblem. It evokes the Ohio flag. So, I'm sorry.
I'm amazed at the leadership of Sleeping Joe.
Well,
If you look real close, you might see the marionette fire.
that's why he's in the basement, because you're up above, with the strings coming down through the ceiling. It's been an interesting week, and then we had that FBI lawyer who had altered some of the email data to help get the case going against him. Pled guilty. Yeah, but he's a little higher up the food chain than what some of the things are that we've been seeing. That's a result of the Durham report investigation. He's about 38. I think he's 38. But in other words, they got enough on him, and the suggestion is he might be the first of a series of dominoes. And if he's pled guilty, then it may be that they actually could have charged him with something more serious, but he took a lesser deal to plead guilty and provided information. So, and that's what we need to do. We need to pray that truth comes out. What is the passage where it talks about the those that do evil love the darkness? Let me find it real quick. Love the darkness. Let's see.
How about John 3:19?
That may be the one we're looking for.
Love darkness rather.
Yeah, that's it. And this is the condemnation that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. And when you think about that, love darkness, this is, when you look at that, when we bring to light, you say, well, what does this have to do with the Bible? Well, evil men, period, men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. That's why they don't want to hear about God. That's why they don't want Christians out in the public square open about what we believe. Because we represent the light of God. We carry the light of God with us. And they don't like it. They like the darkness so they can get away with things. Remember in Deuteronomy, I think it's chapter 19. In Deuteronomy 19 talked about the false witnesses, remember? And essentially that's what this guy did. He bore false witness. In Deuteronomy 19, it says, starting in verse 16 here, if a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong. Do you think we've seen this recent in our country? False testimony? You've got this high-ranking FBI lawyer who said he gave false testimony. What does the Bible say that should have been done? If a false witness rise up against any man, this is Deuteronomy 19, verse 16, to testify against him that which is wrong, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before the Lord and before the priests and the judges which shall be in those days, and the judges shall make diligent inquisition. And behold, if the witness be a false witness, and hath testified falsely against his brother, well, God has a great solution for this. Here it is, verse 19. Then shall ye do unto him as he had thought to have done unto his brother. Notice what he says, so shalt thou put the evil away from among you. And then stop there, verse 20. And those which remain shall hear and fear, and shall henceforth commit no more any such evil among you. See, this is why we as Christians should be involved in what's going on with these trials and investigations. Because we need to bring light into the darkness that's there in the halls of men. We complain, and I can go to church after church, and when Kim and I were involved in missions, and I went to churches, even though we were talking about missions, and this was back in the late 80s and early 90s, People still complain about, oh, the corruption and, oh, they don't do this. And people always do that, right? But how does something get done? Christians are supposed to be salt and light. So
You share the destruction, right?
we bring light into a dark place. And then when we see this happening, he says, then we can expose the evil. This not only puts the evil away from us, it stops what's going on, but also other people see that and they don't do it themselves. So when we as Christians bow out of the public sector and we don't do this, what are we doing? We're letting evil take hold in the halls of government, aren't we? This is why in Awake America, these pastors that run that are has sent that letter to the government officials and the governor. Because if we don't do anything, they get away with it. And if they get away with it, then somebody else does something. See, the pushback on that call log that I was talking about, the pushback that came from getting that call log prompted the lieutenant governor to make a few calls to people saying, well, we're not telling the health departments to harass churches. That wouldn't have happened had not Christians got involved and said, hey, you're intruding on the churches. You have overstepped your bounds. You have a realm of authority, but you have overstepped your authority. And because Christians called our government officials on their error, I'm being polite when I say error, but on their overstepping of their authority, they kind of backed off a little bit. You go further back. Back in March, were it not for Christians pressuring the governor, he would have shut down churches, I believe, in the state. Like they did in Michigan, like they did in Kentucky, like they did in New Jersey and California. Our governor was, I think, that close to doing it. Instead, he elected to try to shame churches that didn't close. But it was because some people held his feet to the fire. He didn't go quite that far. So when Christians don't get involved, what happens? The darkness increases. We need, as long as we're here, and we have the ability to do so, we need, well, First Timothy chapter 2 talks about praying for kings and all those in authority. We certainly need to pray for them, but we also need to pray that they govern rightly. And if they're doing something wrong, we need to call them on it. And we need to pray that God will get a hold of their heart and change their heart, change their mind.
So if we don't get involved, ultimately we get sent to the lions.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Or we get sent to the lions. But
If we don't warn the wicked, their blood will be on us.
well, exactly. Remember Isaiah, if a watchman sees the danger coming, remember they're watching. Let's find that. 6. Yeah, Isaiah. Take a look at that. Because that's a very good passage to bring up in relation to this. Ezekiel 3. Which one did you have?
Isaiah 56:10.
We'll come back to the other one in Ezekiel as well, because there's a couple points. So Isaiah 56, verse 10 here, where he says, his watchmen are blind, they are all ignorant, they are all dumb dogs, they cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving the slumber. Bruce Musselman used to love this verse. He used to love using that term, dumb dogs. Dumb doesn't mean stupid, it means they can't speak. Deaf and dumb. Deaf can't hear, dumb can't speak. And so they say they're dumb dogs mean they don't bark. What's a watchdog supposed to do? somebody comes in, they're supposed to bark. It alerts you that there's somebody there that don't belong there. If they don't bark, they're not doing what they're supposed to be there for. And Ezekiel chapter
3, 18 and 19.
Ezekiel chapter 3. All right. Let's go over there. And we are in verse 17 here where he says, Son of man, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word at my mouth, and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, or speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity. But notice what he says here, but his blood will I require at thine hand. Meaning, you're responsible. If we don't give warning, we're responsible. And then he says in verse 19, yet if thou warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul. Let me hold over here for a second, and let's look at, hold your finger there, go to Ezekiel, I think it's chapter 33. Okay, here we are. So think of this picture that we have. We're supposed to be watching. In Ezekiel 33 and chapter, let's go back up to verse number 1, where he starts. Again, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak to the children of thy people, and say unto them, when I bring the sword upon the land, if the people of the land take a man of their coast and set him for their watchman, if when he seeth the sword come upon the land, he blow the trumpet and warn the people, then whosoever heareth the sound of the trumpet and taketh not warning, if the sword come and take him away, his blood shall be upon his own head. He heard the sound of the trumpet and took not warning, his blood shall be upon him, but he that taketh warning shall deliver his soul. Then it says in verse 6, but if the watchman see the sword come, and blow not the trumpet, the people be not warned, if the sword come, and take any person from among them, he is taken away in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at the watchman's hand. So thou, O son of man, I have set thee a watchman upon the house of Israel. Therefore thou shalt hear the word at my mouth, and warn them from me. When I say unto the wicked, O wicked man, thou shalt surely die. If thou dost not speak to warn the wicked from his way, that wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. See, we have a responsibility, don't we? He's talking to Ezekiel here. Son of man, I've set thee to be a watchman. Ezekiel was God's messenger. Well, what are we today? You're his messenger, right? Paul said we're ambassadors for Christ. Well, what's an ambassador? An ambassador is the messenger that carries the message of one government to the other government. So we're ambassadors for Christ. So we're to give a warning. And if we don't, the blood is on our hands. We're not guiltless. Now, I understand we're saved. We know that. We know that we're saved. But can you imagine standing before the Lord knowing that there are people who died and went into a crisis of eternity because we didn't give them warning? We're going to give an account of our service. The judgment seat of Christ is not on the basis of who's getting into heaven or not. The people standing in the judgment seat of Christ were already going to heaven. It's a judgment based on our service, the quality of service. And,
we don't want to fail to do the work that we've been given to do. So, again, when we look at these things, we have a responsibility, don't we, to warn of what's happening. We have a responsibility. That's where with the Awake America, where these pastors have come together, seeing their responsibility to both warn the government that they're doing something that's wrong, and to get them to turn to repent, and also to alert Christians as to what's happening so that we'll pray for them. And then when somebody's doing something wrong, when the Speaker of the House in Ohio, Larry Householder, was escorted out by the FBI and placed under arrest for corruption, it shouldn't matter whether there's an R or a D after his name. Fact is, if all the charges against him are correct or true, then he was doing evil in his office. And those should be brought to light so that others will see what he did and know what happened to him. And they'll say, you know what? I'm not going to do that as well. But if they see people like him get away with it, it emboldens them to do that. Same thing when they see people encroach upon the church. Mask mandate. Well, it's just a piece of cloth. What's so hard with that? Can't you just do that and just get along? I mean, aren't you? No, it's the government coming in and mandating.
It's such a little thing. Why can't they leave us alone?
Exactly. Oh, as an aside, probably you've seen the thing online that says, if the virus is so bad, where's the biohazard disposals for the masks and gloves that people are wearing? Anybody see the biohazard disposal things at the store when you're there? I see masks and things on the ground. In the parking lot, just used masks and throwing them down there. Where's the biohazard disposal boxes?
Lots of bathrooms that have disposal units for sharks.
Yeah, like where's the biohazard ones in the bathrooms? Well, if it's so bad. But it's all part, they're pushing as far as they can. It's the dehumanizing. Because, Nancy, you got your mask handy, your face shield. Hold up your face shield there a second. I got mine back here if you don't. Okay, now, see, you can see through that, right? Neil's got his. You can see facial expressions. And I think I mentioned this to somebody earlier. A pastor from North Carolina that was traveling with Brother Fox and Brother Conley. He's a pastor from North Carolina. He said in North Carolina you can't wear those. You have to have a cloth mask over your face. Because those aren't, this is again my opinion, those are not dehumanizing enough.
Right.
The cloth mask obscures most of your face, and much of our communication is done through facial expressions. People who are hard of hearing, what do? They watch your mouth, right? Well, they can't do that when they got it covered. But a face shield, which I'll guarantee blocks a lot more if you cough or sneeze with that on, right there. But cloth mask, it comes through.
They got those plexiglass things.
Yeah. But they're not good enough. They want to, it's a dehumanizing process.
Some masks are discriminating against the deaf. They can't liberate.
Yeah. So, again, just going through that, when we look at it, it's our responsibility. We need to pray for people in government, but we also need to pray that God's light shines in. If people are doing evil, they love the darkness. They don't want to hear what God has to say about it. They don't want to be held accountable. They just want to keep getting away with it. Yeah.
The next big thing that's going to happen after the masks is going to be the vaccine. I think this group probably knows a lot about it, but we saw that legislation back in, I think it was April or May, where the government wants to incentivize businesses and churches with money only if they get the vaccine and they can get papers once you have the vaccine, and then you get a bunch of government stimulus money because you signed up for the vaccine program. And I've been asking a lot of coworkers what they're going to do because I can see it coming. And it's not the market piece, but what I'm trying to say is that's going to cause. If you think the anti-vaccine people are mad now, you're going to have a whole bunch of people that are just going to, like in my business, there's 60 people that work there. And I've just been asking people, would you get vaccinated if it was your choice? And they're all saying no. And I said, well, what if it cost you your job? And they said, I still wouldn't do it. And some people are like, it's not a big deal, I'll take it. So, but the people that are adamantly against it, and then the people that are thinking it's their savior because it's going to solve all the virus problems, you're going to see, I mean, if you think the masks are causing a little bit of division and tension, when you see people thinking this is their savior against people that think they're not going to jam that stuff into their body, you're going to see a lot worse, and it's coming. So just kind of,
I get it. How they conditioning, because ultimately the devil wants to get to the point where people will accept the mark, and they won't buy or sell or trade without it.
Absolutely.
Not only will people take the mark, but also people will refuse to deal with somebody who doesn't have it. And we're seeing that right now with just the mask,
right,
where people are being conditioned. And look how much we've done in 6 months. You remember about a month and a half or so ago, the governor put this mask order out a little over a month ago. It was only going to be for 2.5 weeks. We're going to knock this thing down, and that'll be it. 2.5 weeks. Now, you know what he's saying? We got to have statewide masks until we get a vaccine.
That's right. See, they're already dropping all that.
They keep pushing and keep pushing. And if we don't take a stand, where does it end up? Well, we know where it's going to end up. But go ahead.
Wouldn't we be raptured out of here before?
Oh, yeah.
Mark,
But they need to condition people in advance because the devil doesn't know when the rapture is going to take place. You know, Titus 2:13 says it's the blessed hope. Well, my hope is that it's going to take place, here before too long. I mean, I'd love to see the Lord, sound the trumpet here in the next few weeks. That would be great.
Amen.
That's my blessed. That's my hope. That's a blessed hope, I think, the hope for the rapture to come. But the devil doesn't know when. He's got to start. He's got to be getting things going so that when it takes place, he'll be ready. What's that?
We can be so conditioned.
And look how easy it was to condition some people. So when the rapture takes place, a lot of the people who are more resistant to the conditioning are going to be gone.
That's like you come out with that sheets of pen and I'm talking one time, everybody stopped and turned and looked at me. I'm like, right. Mm-hmm. And that's only because I was mixing cement and stuff, and that dust gets in my sinuses, and oh boy, that's just like,
Oh yeah. So that really is
that we're a mess with that number line. We work with us. When I was wearing a mask, still just that a little, just a little bit of that.
So again, as Christians, we want to approach these things understanding what God says about it,
Right.
and where it's leading to. Because we know that things are leading in that direction.
Well, that's like the word of choice, pandemic. Everyone's like, you heard of it, pandemic. Yeah, everybody's saying it's like a second. Now, one doctor gets on there, and he's a microbiologist, and he's like, this ain't a pandemic. He starts quoting history. What a pandemic was a Black Death. 1 in 4 people got it.
Well, even in Ohio's own figures show that we've been below epidemic level since last month. Middle of last month.
Yeah, but
You wouldn't know that watching the news, would you? Or listening to the governor. If we're below epidemic levels, where's the justification for the state of emergency? There is none. So why are we still in a state of emergency? Why are we still worried about masks?
and he called them hazard numbers.
Yeah, it is that because they didn't control.
They took that 1 week, and they said they have 1 week, the whole year. They said it's a pandemic. He's like, I can't do that. Because he went back and he pulled these numbers from the 1960s on a lot of accidents. During the holiday seasons, there were more auto accidents than, during rush hour the rest of the year.
You bring that up in auto accidents.
Yeah.
Just heard a statistic on the news. Is it coming up here? Or just earlier, we were getting ready. 1 in 4 young adults has contemplated suicide since the lockdown. That's far higher than normal. 1 in 4. We already know that the suicide rate is skyrocketing in the country. Worldwide, actually. I think if the truth be known, more people have died from suicides than the coronavirus. But if they tested positive, you'd be sure it'll be listed as a corona death. Sometimes the corona causes people to, it kills people in suicidal ways.
Whoever gets your brain.
Yeah. So I mean, it's
In my brain.
The other
Yeah.
big thing is we saw was Trump's peace agreement with Israel and the Emirates, and it just hit me today because I was seeing that a lot of prophecy and Bible people just want to look at every peace agreement for obvious reasons, and to me it struck me as Trump is really setting a lot of precedents as a world leader.
mm-hmm.
And it just dawned on me that he's having so much success that this Antichrist figure, once he comes on the scene, he's going to have to basically beat Trump's accomplishments.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump is doing all these different agreements in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
He's always working on them. Yeah, and it's not the 7-year peace agreement. These are just other little agreements with Israel and local nations. So you can see things kind of setting up for the next leader to try to best his accomplishments and brag that he made this 7-year agreement. That's just what my spirit was saying to me when I was looking at this.
Now, along with what you're saying there, and I was thinking about this too, because in Ezekiel chapter 38, here we talked about that coming invasion, and about how that potentially could be the red horse of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Remember, the first one is the revelation of the Antichrist. Second one, the war, the red horse. The white horse is the Antichrist. The red horse is the war. And the speculation is, and just to real quick get to what I'm saying here, remember we talked about how in Psalm 83 there's an apparent battle that'll take place before the Ezekiel 38 invasion, which accounts for why Egypt and Syria and what amounts to today Jordan and Iraq and also Lebanon are not mentioned in Ezekiel 38 because they're destroyed. And then we talked about how Ezekiel 38, as a result of the Psalm 83 battle, that could be what sets the stage for Ezekiel 38. Because the Psalm 83 battle, remember, in addition to Egypt being destroyed, and one prophecy that it'll be uninhabitable for 40 years, and also that others around them destroyed, but it also suggests that Israel itself will be reduced in number and strength to where they may be willing to listen to somebody who comes in with a peace plan. And again, we're just speculating, trying to put scripture together, because we've got imperfect understanding. But he comes with this peace plan, which could be the 7-year covenant
that Daniel chapter 9 talks about, but there's a group led by Russia out of the north that come against Israel and to take a spoil, and they look at Israel in Ezekiel 38 as a land of, verse 11, unwalled villages at rest that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. That's not Israel today. Israel today has got gates and bars and troops and everything. They're under siege.
Iron Dome.
What's that?
Iron Dome.
Yeah, Iron Dome and everything. So if the Antichrist by this time has said, we'll give you security if you lay down your weapons so that we don't see I think that the Psalm 83 battle could result in a regional nuclear war, but without getting into all that right now, if he's got this peace in place, that would lead to the land of unwalled villages and all. And as they come in with this assembly from the north, this alliance that they have, there's also an assembly of nations that resist it. They don't do much. They just say, hey, what are you doing, basically? And if you look at that in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, and to take away cattle and goods, and to take a great spoil? So they're objecting to what this Northern Alliance is doing, and they identify Sheba, Dedan, merchants of Tarshish, the young lions thereof. And we talked about Tarshish being the merchants of Tarshish. Tarshish was an outpost on the Atlantic side of Spain, near where we have a naval station, Rota, Spain, near Rota, Spain. It's in that general area. And what they did, they used that as a jumping off point, the merchants of Tarshish, to head up further along the French coast and then over into Ireland and Britain. So where they operated tin mines, tin was a crucial metal because it was not in a plentiful supply in the Middle East, but yet in the British Isles they had a huge supply of tin. Copper is soft, but when you mix tin with it, it becomes hard. It becomes bronze, but we use in the King James Bible the word brass because that's the word that they had in 1600. Brass meant bronze or brass or any copper alloy. So it's a perfectly fine word. Sometimes I mention that because people will say, oh, the King James Bible got it wrong. They say brass. It wasn't brass, it was bronze. Anybody that knows the word history knows that brass meant bronze at that time as well as brass. It's the same thing. Same word for both. So they safeguarded that. The young lions thereof would be the offspring of the merchants of Tarshish, which, there's good reason to believe that the offspring of the merchants of Tarshish would be the offspring of Spain and France and British Isles. What is that? Americas, Mexico, South America, Australia, India perhaps. But the other two there, Sheba and Dedan, are the interesting two. Now there's some other Shebas and Dedans that are mentioned, but when you look at them, this Sheba and I'm sorry? Well, it appears because there's a Sheba and there's a Dedan that's a descendant of Ham and Cush that would be over more toward Egypt. But these are apparently in a Sheba as well. But in, let's see, I'm going to have a reference here. Let's see if I can find the reference. But remember when Abraham had his third wife, Keturah? Remember, Keturah was his third wife. He had sons and daughters. And descended from Keturah, the Bible says, is Sheba and Dedan. And their descendants went into the area of what would be like Saudi Arabia going up into the Gulf states, United Arab Emirates. This is what made me think about that. Qatar and the places up along there. So you've got this
situation right now where Saudi Arabia has been cooperating with Israel.
And now the Emirates.
And now the United Arab Emirates. So we're seeing, in a sense, the lining up of Sheba and Dedan
Amen.
as being at least not enemies of Israel. So, to me, what I saw when I thought, like you were talking about when you heard about that treaty, I was thinking of this.
Yeah.
Sheba and Dedan.
Good one.
You know, we've got Saudi Arabia, who has been closely cooperating with Israel on a military basis. Now you've got the United Arab Emirates signing this amazing treaty where they're going to be able to freely travel back and forth between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. They're going to start direct flights from Israel to the UAE and back, and trade and all kinds of things. And you know who's objecting to it? Turkey.
Of course.
Turkey is irate over this, and some of the Syrians and some of the Iranians and some of the other more militant Muslim groups, the ones that line up with the Northern Alliance around Gog and Magog, they're the ones objecting to this.
Which is when Hitler started.
And yeah, but I'm gonna say, but yet you see the ones that seem to line up with Sheba and Dedan cooperating more with Israel. And it almost seems like we can see coalescing the group that's going to one day invade Israel and the group that's going to say, hey, what are you doing, and make an objection to it. I'm not saying that it is, but it certainly makes one wonder. And the Bible says we're supposed to be watching and waiting. So part of the process of watching and waiting is we're watching to try and see things that indicate that the Lord's coming is near.
Yeah.
I think this is something that indicates that.
What happened there in Lebanon? That ship blew up.
The warehouse where they had the ammonium nitrate. Yeah, and it took out the whole area there.
Okay, it was a warehouse. And it took the ship out with it too.
Yeah, there were ships that were taken out, buildings that were taken out. And best guess is that probably Hezbollah was stockpiling stuff there. No doubt ammonium nitrate, because I've read several articles where they were talking about, you look at the colors in the cloud, and that initial red one that comes up, they said that was characteristic of certain types of munitions and things. And then the one that came up when the ammonium nitrate, blew. Hezbollah was talking about blowing up the port at Haifa in Israel with ammonium nitrate. It's almost like God said, "You're not blowing up the port at Haifa. Spark that, and boom, it's gone."
Ammonium nitrate is what they used in Oklahoma City.
Remember Oklahoma City,
The
Bombing.
yeah,
federal building?
federal building.
That was ammonium nitrate.
That was ammonium nitrate.
In a van. Hezbollah stored a bunch of ammonium nitrate in a warehouse in London a few years ago. And MI6 found it, and they got that cleared out. I wonder what they were going to do with it in London. And then the Guy Fawkes celebration, that's what it was, Guy Fawkes. If you're familiar with Guy Fawkes, it was the gunpowder plot. Guy Fawkes and his conspirators, they rented a house and went down in the cellar, and they dug in underneath Parliament. The king was supposed to be addressing all the lords in the Parliament, and they were going to set off the gunpowder and blow it up to bring England under the sway of the Catholic Church again. And so that's where Guy Fawkes Day comes from. It was found out and prevented from happening. And it kept England from going back under the Catholic Church, which allowed, of course, for the Word of God to eventually be published in England and a whole bunch of things. But God intervened and kept that from happening. They also had a large supply of ammonium nitrate that Hezbollah had stockpiled in Germany. I want to say Munich, but I don't know exactly what that's right. There was a city in Germany. So what were they doing with it in those places? Probably Same thing that they had plans in what was in Lebanon. They didn't intend on blowing themselves up, but there's obviously stuff going on. And the explanation was it was fireworks.
Oh,
Well, if you had a bunch of munitions going off, I mean, if anybody's ever seen what happens if you have bullets in a fire, I mean, it's not like firing a gun exactly, but I remember when I was younger, we had a fire and one of the older kids in it, a friend of my brother's or something, threw some 22 bullets into the fire, and they're popping off. You know, it looked like fireworks.
yeah, it was a bullet that ran out. Flame.
But in the propellant,
Yeah.
it hooks off and boom. Of course, there's nothing to channel it, so it doesn't go flying like it does out of the barrel of a bullet or gun when it's all steam. But you don't want to be there when it goes. But I just remember going until they were done.
Plus, they also, Israeli intelligence said, what, most southern villages in Lebanon that are stockpiling rocket.
Oh yeah, they've been doing that. They're stockpiling with the Gaza Strip. They've got tunnels underneath the border, both from the Gaza Strip and from Lebanon. I watched a thing online about 2 months ago where they were in one of these tunnels, and the tunnel itself was over 30 feet underground. And they were broadcasting from inside. They did like the Israeli Defense Force. He was a major or a lieutenant colonel, and he, with the camera crew, they were walking through it. And this tunnel, I mean, it had lights, and it had furniture, and all. It was a whole installation underneath there. This is what they've been doing with a lot of the quarantine that they're using. What? Well, I don't think they intentionally set it off. I think that was what they planned on using in the Haifa in Israel. But it got sparked somehow. Insurance companies call that what? An act of God. I think we can call that an act of God. I think God kind of tweaked that so that they weren't going to be able to use it in Israel. Because God intervenes. He does.
And I think that's one
He is
reason
hindering.
That'd be one reason why that treaty went so fast.
Yeah, because I mean, some people speculated did the Israelis blow that up? I don't really think they did. I mean, they could have, or somebody else could have. But however it is, I think God was actively preventing them from blowing up the port of Haifa. I think that's what Hezbollah was talking about doing. They have several things online where they were getting
Because
their
they
things.
had, what was it? Qatar that had the Muslim Brotherhood that were trying to set off bombs and stuff there, turn them against Israel.
Yeah, Qatar for a while was kind of decided there was a Muslim Brotherhood ISIS that they were citing. One of the two.
And I think Saudi Arabia said, don't do it, we'll just crush you. Because they had, this is like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, Obama was in there, and when they tried to take over Egypt, the Muslim Spring, whatever was that called? Yeah. And that there, and then you have all this stuff going on. When that happened, everybody said, you have to take Israel's side. Because eventually they get blamed.
Mia gave me this thing here on Sheba and Eden.
Someone might.
Yeah. Okay, that was. I thought this was familiar. That's something that I'm looking at, trying to think where did he get this from? But yeah, it's talking about the Hamitic, the descendants of Ham, the Hamitic Sheba from Genesis 10:17. who also had a brother named Eden. I'm trying to read my own stuff here. This is a few years ago. In Genesis, there it is, Genesis 25. So if you go to Genesis 25, this is the one we were talking about. I'm going to say, wow, this is really a good writing here. You're doing it.
Oh, my
So, Genesis 25, verse 1. Then again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimran, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua. Verse 3 says, and Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Eshurim, and Letushim, and Lomim. Trying to read the distance there. But it goes into talking about them. But as you look at them, these are different than if you go back to Genesis chapter 10. In Genesis chapter 10, where it says in verse number 6, and the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan, and the sons of Cush, it says Seba, and Havilah, and Sabta, and Rama, and Sabteka, and the sons of Rama, Sheba and Dedan. See, this Sheba and Dedan in Genesis chapter 10, they were over in the area of below Egypt. And this author here on this piece points out that you can trace them to where Djibouti and Eritrea are. If you go along what they call the Horn of Africa there, it's the north east part of Africa, and where it comes up along there, below the Red Sea, and Somalia and Ethiopia and Chad are all in there, and Eritrea and Djibouti are along the coast there. That's where the Sheba and the Dedan were, that were descendants of Cush and Ham. And those are already identified previously in Ezekiel 38 as being part of that alliance that invades Israel. So they wouldn't be invading and objecting at the same time. But we have the other Sheba and Dedan that were the descendants of Abraham through his wife Keturah. And remember, when Abraham died, he left, a lot for his son Isaac and his son Ishmael. But he also provided a lot for the sons that he had from Keturah. And the Bible says they went away and toward the east. Where's United Arab Emirates from Israel? In the east. Going toward the east. And some of them went toward the southeast and all that. And so I believe that the Sheba and Dedan in Ezekiel 38, that make the objection are the descendants of Abraham. So that would be, I think, some of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and some of these countries. It's interesting, when Saudi Arabia was having some difficulties with Iran back last winter, they actually offered to allow the Israelis to overfly Saudi Arabia to attack the Iranian nuclear facilities. So that's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, but apparently something's happening to Iran's
The nuclear facilities blown up.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
All right, God.
I think he's using somebody for that one. But it is interesting when you start looking at these things and we start comparing what part of the world is represented by these places that are mentioned here. You start figuring it out and you start putting two and two together, And so getting back to that peace treaty that was announced, that's one of the things that I thought of is here's yet another piece of that coming together, suggesting that might be on the right track with this. This article might be on the right track. That's from the booklet that I did, The Coming Arab-Israeli Nuclear War. Actually, did you get a copy of that? Because I remember Pastor McKenna had me talking about that when it came out. Yeah, that's what it's. I didn't recognize it when we brought this over. Thanks. No, it's all right. So, again, Bible says my people were destroyed for what? Lack of knowledge. So, we as God's people, we ought to be watching and waiting. We're the ones who ought to be. We can't expect the world to understand these things, put this together. And, if you just keep getting people coming out saying, oh, I just had a vision, just had a dream. Well, we got visions right here recorded for us. And, we know these are from God. And people have all kinds of dreams and might think that there's something to them, and sometimes they may coincide with something. But this is sure. I mean, it's the word of God. And these were prophets where it says, thus saith the Lord. And to me, that's a pretty good reliability factor when it says, thus saith the Lord. Versus, could this have been? Well, this says it is. And so, for me, I like to try and follow these things and try to make sense of them.
Good adage is, if it hasn't happened, it will.
Right. A prophecy in the Bible that hasn't been fulfilled yet is because it just hasn't yet. It doesn't mean it won't. It just hasn't gotten to that point yet.
Germany. They're actually cooking up to be communists.
Well, the Germans are cooking up to the Russians partly because of gas. Because that's their Russia is Germany's natural gas supplier. From us, we didn't want to. Yeah, they could have, but this is just another thing of ties, of them being pulled together.
So if you're Germany comes under the groups in a line of dark.
Sweden is socialist now. The only one that's not right now is Finland.
But in reality, some of the Scandinavian countries, we call them socialists, but really what they were doing is because they were giving away a lot of money, but they're running out of money, and so they're starting to walk back to these policies. They still operate very much under a capitalistic system, even though the government would give them money.
Yeah, because it's like the Obama was talking to was like that one formula he was using: take from those who have, give to those who haven't, because those who haven't deserve for those who have. Because if you didn't build that.
Yeah, well, it was Marxist.
Yeah, that's my.
From each according to his ability to each according to each according to his
AOC
is each according to his need.
AOC was saying that.
Well, and
2 weeks ago.
it's really sad that so many of our young people today believe that that's a superior system we're looking at. It's like somebody once said, capitalism is the worst economic system other than every other one. But it's provided more goods and services for more people than any other economic system ever provides. And really, when you think about it, there are biblical bases for it. But capitalism, as well as every other economic system, without Christ, is doomed. Because what happens in capitalism without Christ? Greed and corruption.
I got that documentary on World War I, and
Roosevelt
was saying piece of bread and land. And that was like right before they signed the armistice with Germany. And a couple of months later, it just didn't work. When they turned on the white Russian. And they were talking about that. It's like literally they had to go in there and kill the farmer and his entire family in order to take the land because they refused to let it. They were running guns at them for that stuff. Doing that right now in South Africa.
Yeah.
Yep.
And several other African countries.
Mugabe did it.
Mugabe did it, yeah.
Zaire.
Yeah. Because when he came to power, he basically confiscated all of the farms. And it's
Problem is they're not farmers, just like the Russians.
Yeah.
They starve.
well, Russia decided they were going to go to cotton in Siberia. So, I mean, because the commissar in Moscow thought it could be done. Even though, they weren't farmers, they didn't know it couldn't be done. They just said, you're going to do it. What was it, Somalia back in the 80s? The food for, the food aid things that were being done, that was all orchestrated because the communist government taking over, they took the farmers off their land. They closed the farms down because they put them in camps because they were trying to force them under communism. And they wouldn't, and the aid that all these Western countries raised, all the food and everything sat on ships in the harbor. They wouldn't let them unload for the most part. Some did get unloaded, and when it got unloaded, it sat in the warehouse. They wouldn't let it get distributed, except for the little bit that went between the government and the military. And all these people were supporting, these food, what were the big things, all these bands and everything, Live Aid and all these band things. And I was in the Air Force in England at the time, and we're looking at all these intel reports, and they're showing that these ships most of them were even allowed to dock. And then they raised the docking fees. I mean, they raised them sky high. They were exploiting that. So all these people that gave money to those Live Aid things, thinking they were doing something, it helped the communists secure their hold in that part of Africa. But if you said that, you didn't care. You try to tell people that, and well, you just didn't care about starving people.
Now one church that crisis in Haiti hit, they said, they weren't looking for the food and money that they sent down there. They put him in jail. And until they told him, you stay here in jail, it's like, keep looking. Get out, go back home.
But hunger is a very powerful tool. Look what Stalin did to the Ukraine. He starved them into submission. And I can't think of the guy's name. The journalist from America that lived there in poor Ukraine. He's not Burrow. But he came back and he published this story about how there's no starvation in the Ukraine. There's no famine there. He got a Pulitzer Award. And it was all lies. He was a useful idiot on the Soviets. He published lies knowing that they were lies, and some of the people who advocated for giving him the Pulitzer knew that it was all lies. But yet starvation has always been a pretty strong tool. And see, right now, much of Africa is facing starvation again because all of the shutdowns and everything, farmers have not planted food, and the ones that are out there, they have trouble getting it. Plus, we've got these these incredible desert locust swarms that are just blanketing the area, far worse than anything they've seen in decades. And they'll descend on a farm and eat everything green. There goes their crop. And but because of all of that, you've got famine developing in certain parts of Africa and in other parts of the world. And the people off the farms who got them over. Walter Duranty, he's the one that got the Pulitzer for publishing A Pack of Lies. Who wrote that? And I don't know.
But that was along the same time where the Russian Revolution was this beautiful thing.
Yeah, but they used starvation, and I was looking for something earlier. Jesus had the parable of the guy with the vineyard. Remember, he hires the workers in his vineyard. Let's see.
First and last.
Yeah, they agreed to
Work for a certain time. In Matthew 20,
where if you don't own the farm, you can't take us on back.
That's right.
All right, Matthew chapter 20. And when Jesus starts out in verse 1, it says, "For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is the householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard." And we understand that one of the main purposes of this parable is to talk about people coming into the kingdom of heaven. And whether it was at the time of the apostles, early in the day, or today, and the work that we do, we all are going to receive something from the Lord when we get to heaven. But there's other things in this that we can make some observations on, because in the course of this, the guy goes out in the morning and he hires laborers to work in his vineyard. So this guy's a property owner. Well, that right there, because people try to use the Bible to support communism. And there's actually young Christians today. Some of them are actually in the pastorate who are using the Bible to promote communism. But this one here says, in this parable, Jesus talks about a guy holding property. And he talks about hiring labor. And coming to an agreement with labor that he will pay them a day's wages for a day's labor. Now, this is all well and good, and it makes sense. You say, well, what's the big deal? Well, remember I said earlier about capitalism without conscience, without Christ. Capitalism without Christ is doomed to fail. This is an example of where capitalism, with the Christian spirit, of course, this is prior to the resurrection, this is going to the biblical worldview and all that. Somebody who acknowledges God, somebody who wants to serve God, is going to have this type of a view. This man hires people, and he needs more people, so he goes back to the market, because that was their version of the temp agency. You need a day laborer, you go to the market, and there are 8 people waiting in the market. And hey, I'm available for work. I can prune grapevines. I can sow wheat, or I can do whatever. And you hire what you think. He says, well, I got a lot of work here. I need some more laborers. And as you read through this, it says when he agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, and a penny being a day's wages, he sent them into his vineyard. And when about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, I will give you. And they went their way. Again, he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing idle, and saith unto them, Why stand ye here all the day idle? Let me pause for a minute. Remember, the way they kept time was by when the sun rose and when the sun set. They didn't have clocks. So an hour was not the way we keep an hour today. 60 minutes is an hour, 60 minutes, each minute composed of 60 seconds. The way they did it was when the sun came up, it didn't matter the time of year, that was 6 a.m. That's the first hour of the day. When the sun was straight up overhead, that was high noon, and that if 6 a.m. was the first hour, that makes it the 6th hour of the day. When the sun set, it was 6 p.m. It didn't matter what time of year it was or anything. When the sun set, that was 6 p.m. And that made that the 12th hour of the day. So when he went out at the 11th hour, that would be like 5 p.m. according to them. And so he finds these people sitting there in the market. And he asks them, why stand ye here all the day idle? They've been there since 6 in the morning. When the sun come up, now the sun's getting ready to set. And in verse 7, they say unto him, because no man hath hired us, he saith unto them, go ye also to the vineyard, and whatsoever is right in that shall ye receive. So he hires these guys. Now keep in mind, these people he hired had families to feed. They went out to get hired so they would earn enough money that they could go home and take care of their families. If they didn't get work, their families might not eat. So this vineyard owner, apparently he had a certain amount of wealth because of hiring these people. And so it says when even was come, so now we're getting down to the close of the day, and this is the Lord of the vineyard saying unto the steward, call the laborers and give unto them their hire, beginning from the last unto the first. And when they came that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny, a full day's wages. Did he have to do that? I don't think they expected it. Or if this had been real, I don't think they would have expected it. He didn't have to give them a full day's wages, but I think what this gives us a little insight here, this man had it in his means to help these people out. He didn't have to. The government didn't come in and say, you know what? These people need more money. You must give them a full day's wages.
I'm taking it out of your pay.
I'm taking it out of your, I'm reaching into your pocket and giving it to them after we keep some for ourselves, of course. It's the old handling fee because we just like to handle money. So this man takes it on himself to say, I have the means to help these people out. They wanted to work. Remember, Paul said that if a man won't work, he ought not to eat. Not if he can't, said if he won't. There's a big difference. A lot of people would like to work, but they can't find work. A lot of people would like to work, but their health prevents them. A lot of people would like to work, but something prevents them. Yeah. But these people, they had the ability to work, they wanted to work, they would have worked, but nobody hired them. So he says, these guys have I'm reading into this, he's saying, these people have families that need help, that need food. I have the ability to give them a full day's wage. I don't have to, but I choose to. See, this is capitalism with a heart. This is capitalism with a Christian attitude. Because he sees people that have needs, and he wants to meet the need, and he has it in his ability. This is what's called charity. Remember we talked about the word charity? It's a word for love. And when Paul talks about the greatest of these is charity. What was it? Faith, hope, and charity. The greatest is charity. Because charity is the type of love that sees the need of somebody else and wants to help meet that need. It's a type of love for somebody that you want to take care of them in some fashion. We've degraded the word today to just be handouts. But it meant, I care so much for this person, I'm going to help them.
Rabbi Lappin, he actually put it, the reason why so many people back in those days, and all that wealth was God gave him because he knew they were going to be charitable. That's why he kept, giving them more and more. I think he was referring to Job. Job was like,
It was a very charitable person.
yeah, we were rich too.
Yeah, he was. He was described as a king.
Same thing with Samuel.
So look at this guy. So he gives all this money to these people because he genuinely cared for the people that were working for him. If every company had this attitude, you wouldn't need a union, would you? So, I mean, the union is kind of like a check on the greed of the company owner. If every company had this attitude, how would communism be able to get a foothold? And how can you argue with this? I mean, this is a great attitude. It just,
And if every business owner was that generous, you'd never have a hard time hiring.
and you would,
You see,
yeah,
people would love to go work real hard for an hour.
we would need the welfare program that we have, and people would have money to take care of their needs. But you talk about that, everybody would want to work for this company. I mean, the next time he goes out hiring, man, people love to work for him. I mean, wouldn't you want to work for him? Yeah. Yeah. Now, of course, there's always people who get this wrong. People who are hired at the end of the day. Well, we're going to get more money. No, they got what they agreed with. They got the money for a fair day's wages for a fair day's work. The other ones that were hired at the 11th hour, well, it goes in the 9th hour and the 6th hour and all that, they got the day wages as well. It wasn't that they earned it. It's that this guy said these people have families that need food too. I can help them. And think about it. Isn't there a little more dignity to helping somebody this way than saying, okay, line up at the welfare office until I dispense your handout? These people are actually doing something. More people would be in the market. Yeah.
Somebody else's.
Yeah, and more people are probably going to be in the market when this word got out. Before. Man, I hope I get hired by somebody like this.
So Bethany, he put it, which is why a lot of people resent rich people, because they're doing charitable work.
Yeah,
It's why they could destroy you.
yeah. Many of if you go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, where you had these big captains of industry and all that, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers and all, the Vanderbilts and all, many of them had this attitude. Now, I'm not saying they were all saved. I'm not saying that they all loved the Lord. But many of them did have a Judeo-Christian value system, at least even if it was only anemic. But many of them had this idea that if they earned great wealth, they were responsible to do something with that. Now, we can argue and say the way they earned the great wealth might not have been good, but be that as it were, when they got older, Carnegie, for instance, founded libraries all over the country. Carnegie Mellon University down in Pittsburgh. That's one of the ways he gave back with the wealth that he achieved. And because there was this attitude that if we've been given this wealth, we should give back. Again, I'm not looking at whether they got the wealth in the right way or not. We can make all kinds of arguments as to whether that was the case.
That would be that cheerful giver comes from.
Yeah, sure. Lord love a cheerful giver.
God gave it to you.
Yeah.
Make God extremely happy if you kept passing
Well, remember when they went to rebuild clear out the temple and rebuild the temple during the days of not Nehemiah, was it Josiah? I think which one it was. The temple had been kind of left in ruins. You got a godly king in Judah, and they said and they put a box up to put money in, and they got so much money they had to say, tell the people to stop giving. How many churches had that problem? Don't give. Don't put any money in the offering plate. Don't take the offering plate now. We got too much money. You usually have that problem.
It's kind of revival.
Yeah, it was a time of revival because people, their hearts were right with God and they were giving. Now that was to the Lord's work, and And obviously, when people are getting to the Lord's work can go forward and do more and reach more people, help more people. And Paul says in him that stole, steal no more. I like that verse where um, Ephesians 4. In Ephesians 4, where he starts in verse number, let's see, the sentence I think begins in verse 20, where he says, the sentence begins in verse 20, where he says, Ephesians 4:20, but ye have not so learned Christ, if so be that ye have heard of him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus. Notice what he says in verse 22, that you put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lust. So he's talking about where we were before we became a Christian, before we got saved. How about changing? There ought to be a change. When somebody comes to Christ, it may not be an overnight change. It may not be a great change right away, but there should be a change. If somebody's heart is changed, it should start working its way to the outside eventually, shouldn't it? If somebody claims to be saved and they never change, you might want to wonder, did they really get saved? So he's talking about if you're saved, putting off the former conversation, the old man, which is corrupt according to deceitful lust, verse 23, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on a new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. And then he gives an example of what we ought to do. Wherefore, putting away lying, speak truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. So if you used to lie on a routine basis, this is start being truthful with one another. Be angry in verse 26 and sin not. And let not the sun go down upon your wrath. Some people, they just harbor that anger. It becomes bitterness. And they just nurture that anger. They keep it going. He said, you can be angry and not sin. And don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Work through it. And then this is what I like when he says in verse 20, we'll get to that yet. Excuse me, verse 27, neither give place to the devil. And that continued on in verse 26. Be angry and sin not, let not the sun be down upon your wrath. Neither give place to the devil. So you don't want to let the devil get a foothold through anger. And then he says in verse 28, let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. I like this because somebody that stole, basically, if I said, Nancy's got that face shield over there, I deserve that better than she does. Because she thinks she is with that face shield over there. She just thinks she's something with that face. I should have that face shield. What are we doing with the Ten Commandments right now? There's coveting and there's all kinds of things going on, right? And so Nancy's not looking. She's up getting some of Neil's stew up there. And I go, and I get her face shield. And she's like, my face shield disappeared. I don't know what happened to it. Now I've got her face shield. I stole it because, what? That's selfishness on my part, isn't it? That said, I don't really care what she I'm ruining my illustration here. Being too nice. So I'm being selfish. I'm not being considerate of her and other people. Me. My needs, my wants, my desires are more important than anybody else. That's what leads to a lot of theft, isn't it? Yeah. So what's the change that takes place when somebody comes to Christ? God's starting to change them from the inside out, and they used to think, man, whatever they got, I should have it. I deserve who they think they are. I deserve it better than them. Now, instead of stealing, he begins to labor, working with his own hands, the thing which is good,
doing gainful work. And then not only taking care of his own needs, but you can see the change. Instead of desiring to take from everybody else, that he may be able to give to him that needeth. There's a complete change there, isn't it?
Yeah, they're right.
And I started to say, well, Nancy over there, she could really use a hat as well to go with that advisor. And I've been making a little extra money. I'm going to hire a hat. See the different change of attitude there? That's what comes from letting the Holy Spirit work in our life, isn't there? There ought to be a change.
Goes back to the parable of the vineyard.
Parable of what?
The vineyard.
Yeah. And so the vineyard owner in the parable, he's giving to them that need. He's helping them out. And this is what we ought to be doing ourselves. The idea here, let him labor, working with his hands and things which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. By being gainfully employed now, he can give charitably. He can take care of people's needs. He now has the ability. Tim and I, what was it, 2 years ago, we went to the Biltmore down in North Carolina, the Vanderbilt. It was 2 years ago. And one of the things that I found very interesting when we went through there, of course, when Vanderbilt built this, if you're familiar with the Biltmore, that's that huge estate near Asheville, North Carolina, and it's up in the mountains, and it really is impressive when you go through it. And people go through it, and we went through and they're giving a tour, and you would hear people saying, "Oh, what a waste of money! They should have given this to oh, look at this," and they were decrying the money that was spent on this. But the thing that I found interesting, Vanderbilt had inherited all this money. A very wealthy man. He bought up all this land, and something like that, yeah. But what he did, when he hired people to work there, and he hired a lot of people to work there.
How big is that bridge?
It's
80,000 acres now.
yeah. There's a national forest around there that got it started because of the Biltmore land.
200,000 acres.
Yeah.
How big was the building though?
Oh, I don't know.
I've always heard you built one.
It's you get to look at it up online and look at it. I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, his bedroom, Vanderbilt's bedroom,
It's bigger than this room.
was 1,100 square feet, I think, something like that. Just his bedroom. That's like, it's amazing. It's hard to believe, but
4 times the size.
But here's the thing that he did. When he hired people, he hired all these people who were living there in the mountains of North Carolina. And he paid them the prevailing wage for people in New York City, which was unheard of in that part of the country. And what he did, he pumped so much money into that part of the country, the way you have the city of Asheville today. Down the highway from there is the town of Valdez. Now, Valdez was a Waldensian settlement where they came over from Europe and they founded this settlement. This was about the same time the Biltmore was being built. So you had these people in the Asheville area where Biltmore was being built. The servants' quarters in the building, they had their own room. They actually had indoor plumbing. This is in the late 1800s. They had electricity in there. So the people who worked there, that labored in there, they had plumbing, and they had electricity, and they had indoor heating in the wintertime. Nobody living in the cabins out around there had any of this. So they were living essentially like kings when they worked there. So it was a very prestigious place to work. Further down the road in Valdez, when this colony set up, you had whole families living in essentially what amounted to a 10 by 12 or whatever it was wooden shack. And they were just stuck in there.
Like one
Little one-room shack. They did a little loft or something for a sleeping area. And they were they really suffered a lot getting that settlement started. And they, some of them were able to double the size, doubling the size of these houses that whole families were living in, still amounted to only about half the size of this room. And it's just incredible the discrepancy between the two. And so the people that worked in the Biltmore, thanks to his money being pumped into the economy and given to the people, he elevated the lives of the people there so high compared to what most of them lived under. And did he need to pay them New York wages? He could have come in and said, I can pay these people a tenth of what I have to pay in New York City. That's good enough for them. He could have done that. But he chose to do this because he believed that part of his responsibility was to give back what he had been given. And I don't know anything about his religious background. I know he was an independent fundamental Baptist. He might have been from a congregationalist or Episcopalian or something, but whatever it is, he had that idea of giving back charity. And where does that idea of charity come from? It comes from the Bible. And so capitalism with Christian ideals, Christian mindset, is going to be one of the best ways to help lift people out of poverty, to help people, because people who have the ability to work are going to give to those that have need. Help them out. The parable of the vineyard, the guy, that I think shows that. And this here in Ephesians, let him labor, working with his hands, things good that he may have to give them the need. All these sorts of things in here. It's like the early days of the drum register. They had a 6-hour work day because they were allotted time to travel. They were allotted time to travel. So they basically, instead of an 8-hour day, they did a 6-hour day. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they paid them for how far they lived. Because remember, back when they had the electric street line, right? And that was way back in 1883. I remember when the tracks used to come all the way out into the Walgate area. On 18. That was that was actually out further west of Moncton. I see it's 9 o'clock there. Our official ending time 9 o'clock. But anyhow, yeah, go ahead. Cyberlinking wrote in his memoirs, you pay these people so much for a 6-hour day, you get better performance out of it. Amazing. When you take care of your workers, they perform better. And when he better, because he wrote, it was sad because he lost control of Goodyear. And was it 1947? I gotta remember. That's really interesting. Wheels of Fortune, and they were sitting there talking about that. It's like Akron could have been like 10 times as big because you had land over the summer, Copley, and Gordon. Firestone only brings huge amounts of land and gas. They were like, that could have all been Akron. I mean, Akron would have had a business that basically catered to the whole country. Yeah, and it did for the longest time. Yeah, the world rolled on Akron's tires. We're going to go ahead and pray right here. We always stay around and talk afterward. If you don't have to run right away, feel free to. Last week, I think, we were after 11. You don't have to stay. But, all right, let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you for, again, the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you for helping the temperature become a little more manageable here this evening, Lord. Thank you for the conversation that we can enjoy, the fellowship we can enjoy. Bless and watch over us as we leave here tonight. And use us for your word. Bless the day tomorrow. We also pray especially for the day on Sunday. And we just bless and help us, Lord, to serve you and do the work of you this week. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
135,000.
Oh, the Biltmore?
And that's living space, that doesn't include like tables, things like that.
All right, we're signing off here, so God bless and take care.
It was like they would have these guest rooms and they would have like your own bed. They actually had rooms, had enough room in the basement. That was like a trunk because that time you would drill because you would have